Good morning, my beloved spiritual community. Thank you, Mary, for working all of this out for us. We're starting just a little bit late due to technicalities, but yay, we're here. We're all here. Thank you for joining us. I know that somewhere in this service, between the beautiful music, the wonderful message, and the treatment, whatever it is that brought you here, you will find. So let's start first off with the treatment. Take a deep breath and know that everything is going forward in God, with God, as God. As we come together today as a spiritual community and individually, just for each and every one of us, we open our hearts, we open our consciousness, we open to the greatness that is God, that is us, because we are one with that source. And that is the source that moves us through our days, who enlightens our lives, who brings us joy, love, beauty. We are so grateful to know and to be able to access that part of ourselves and that part of the universe that is always good, that is always healthy, that is prosperous and wise. And we know that that wisdom resides within us at all times. That's what brought us here this morning. I am so grateful that that is the truth of who we are. And so we release this knowledge to the one mind, knowing that because we have set it in mind, it is already acted upon. It has already made a shift in our lives. So we release this knowledge, we claim it, we take it for ours, and as one, we say, and so it is. So we do have a very special service this morning. Our beloved Elizabeth McDougall is with us. Yay, Elizabeth. You and the whole area looks absolutely beautiful this morning. If you are not familiar with Elizabeth, you are in for a treat. She is a pianist extraordinaire. She is a local musician, and she's been a musician at church with us for years. We have missed you, Elizabeth. I'm so happy that you're back in the building. So please take it away, Elizabeth. Absolutely beautiful, Elizabeth. Thank you so much. I forgot to introduce myself. I am Gail Rhodes, for a few of you that don't know me. And now it is time to introduce our guest speaker. Our guest speaker is Dr. Jim Lockard. Jim is an ordained minister, teacher, speaker, author, blogger, coach, consultant, and thought leader. Raised in Baltimore, Maryland, he is currently living in Lyon, France. Thank you, Jim, for coming to us from France. Jim's ministry is about helping individuals and spiritual organizations to grow in their capacity for compassion through deep personal work, self-honesty, psychological well-being, and spiritual practices. For 25 years, Jim served as a spiritual leader in the Centers for Spiritual Living in California, Florida, and Maryland. As an author, Jim's works include Creating the Beloved Community, a handbook for spiritual leadership, Sacred Thinking, Awakening to Your Inner Power. He's a chapter author for Spiritual Guidance Across Religions and a chapter author for Innovative Development, Empowering Worldviews and Systems Change. His blog is New Thought Evolutionary, and it's very popular in New Thought circles and beyond. Jim also writes a blog on wine at jimlockardonwine.com. So thank you, Jim, for being here with us. It is our pleasure to have you, and we are very much looking forward to your message. So please, Jim, unmute yourself and you can begin.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction. It's wonderful to be there, even though I'm not there. I assume many of you know that Dr. Candace and I have been prayer partners since 2003.
Wow.
And so we've talked just about once a week for, gosh, what is that, 18 years now.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've heard a lot about your community in a lot of respects over the years, and it's really an honor to be able to share with you today. I am more or less retired from active ministry in the sense that we understand it. What happened was my wife Dorianne and I, we were living in Southern California, and in 2015, she said, "I'm ready to leave California. Are you ready to retire?" And of course, you always, when your wife asks you a question, you always say yes. So we sold everything. We sold our house, our cars, most of our furniture. We put some things in storage, and we took off. And we traveled full time for 3 years. Just kind of, that's just what we were doing. And then we realized we needed to look for a home base, and it came down to Lyon. So we were very happy here. A lot of people don't know much about Lyon. It's sort of not real popular on the American radar, but it's the third largest city in France. It's about 2.2 million people in the metropolitan area. So it's a big city, and there have been human beings living here for 45,000 years. It was the second largest Roman city outside of Rome for hundreds of years, and we've got Roman ruins all over the place, and we've got a beautiful medieval part of the town and so forth. It's really nice. So we were enjoying it here very much. So I thought when Dr. Candace said, "Well, I'll put your name in to be a speaker," and I figured I would talk about our teaching. I think. I know that you're going through a transition in terms of spiritual leadership. And I think it's probably the most important thing to keep in mind as that occurs is the principle of our teaching. And so that you can apply them effectively in what are undoubtedly stressful times. It's a challenge to go through that process, regardless of the circumstances. It's a challenge. And I've worked with a number of spiritual communities going through it, and I've left some spiritual communities, and I've arrived at some spiritual communities, and there's always that sort of growing pains of transition that occurs. So keeping in mind the principles is probably a good thing. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm just going to call this the purpose of science of mind, and just to look at, what really are the basics. What is the teaching about? What is it to help us do? Dr. Holmes was essentially what I would call a synthesizer. He took wisdom from a variety of sources and he synthesized it, put it together in a way that was consistent with what was emerging in American culture in particular, in terms of modernity, in terms of understanding that science needed to be part of any philosophy of life, that we had to take into account the emerging practices and understandings of Western psychology that was just beginning to really blossom in the late 19th and early 20th century. So science of mind is really a synthesis of that ancient wisdom, the spiritual principles that have been around for forever, and modern technology and modern understanding of how our systems work, how we work as human beings, how our brains work, and all that kind of stuff. So that's why American New Thought and all its families of denominations are so important, I think, in spiritual movements today. So many of us, when we come into this teaching, what we think is, what we gather and what we think we hear and think we read is that we can have everything we want right now. And the response to that is kind of, oh, really? In the textbook, on one page, Dr. Holmes says you can have everything you want. And about 3 or 4 pages later, he says you can't have everything you want. So the question would be, is he being contradictory? What's he talking about there? And the reality is, what he's talking about is we can have what we can accept within a context of recognition that we're part of one thing, but we're part of a larger community. And this quote, I think, speaks to it quite well. And this is from a book called What Religious Science Teaches. He wrote, religious science is an educational as well as a religious movement and endeavors to coordinate the findings of science, religion, and philosophy to find a common ground upon which true philosophic conclusions, spiritual intuitions, and mystic revelations may agree with the cold facts of science, thus producing fundamental conclusions, the denial of which is not conceivable to a rational mind. I always like to pull this quote out during our current times when there's so much going on about what are facts. Do we have, we don't seem to be able to agree on what the facts are and things like that, and people questioning science, which I think is valid. I think we should question everything, but we also have to recognize what we're dealing with here, right? So this combination of philosophy, spirituality, the mystical aspects of who and what we are, that we are multidimensional beings, that we exist in a physical universe, but we also exist in a mystical and spiritual universe. And coming to terms with that is one of the greatest challenges that we have in our lives. He wrote, one cannot be a good student of the science of mind who is filled with fear and confusion. He must keep himself in a state of equilibrium, in a state of poise, peace, and confidence, in a state of spiritual understanding. By spiritual understanding, it is not meant anything strange or unnatural, but merely that the belief in goodness must be greater than any apparent manifestation of its opposite. What the world needs is spiritual conviction, followed by spiritual experience. I would rather see a student of this science prove its principle than to have him repeat all the words of wisdom that have ever been uttered. It is far easier to teach the truth than it is to practice it. I'm just going to come out for a moment. So I think that's from the textbook, by the way, and there's some real nuggets in there. The idea that we're supposed to be in a state of peace and poise. Well, have you ever been in a state where you're not so poised or not so peaceful? How many times a day? In my case, I mean, no matter how much you study, how much you practice, how much you meditate, we never really attain that perfect state of peace and poise where we're always on top of things, where no matter what shows up in our lives, we are unmoved by it and so forth. So this is sort of a thing that we want to work toward in a sense, but we also need to recognize that part of our nature is to be interactive and to respond and to react and continue to grow in a real world setting. So one of the things he says, about when he talks about treatment, which we'll get to in a minute, prayer treatment, he talks about the idea that we need to be in a state of peace and poise in order to effectively treat. But often when we need to treat, we're not in that state. So the answer to that he came up with, and really was at the beginning of his ministry, was to train people to be practitioners. That was the origin of his understanding of how do you deal with someone, or how do you help someone who is in a state of emergency, a state of anxiety, a state of stress, to be able to state a truth so that they can absorb it into their system, knowing that that truth has to be stated from a place of, you might say, where it's already so. Because we treat to know what we want or what we desire or what we need is already so. And sometimes we're not in a position to do that. So Dr. Holmes' original idea, and he had learned, by the way, about practitioners during a brief foray into Christian Science, by the way. He never became a member of that, but he did attend and study a bit, and then he moved on into other studies. So the idea of the professional practitioner was something he had on his mind, and he wanted to bring into our teaching. And he didn't, churches actually came later. The idea of having spiritual community developed out of a need to kind of police the practitioners, because he was training practitioners who were going out and doing things that he didn't approve of. And he didn't have any way to control that or to deal with that effectively. So he said, okay, let's have churches, and the practitioners will be assigned to ministers, and the ministers can police the practitioners. And that's really how things evolved back in the late 20s and early 30s of the last century. We're coming up on the 100-year mark of the beginning of the Institute, which was about 1925. So built into the basic understanding of our teaching is that we would use a practitioner, is that we would have someone, or maybe more than one, practitioner that we would go to, like we would go to a physician, like we would go to an attorney for a legal issue. He envisioned professional practitioners earning their living full-time as practitioners, and there have been some over the history of the teaching. I would say no more than a few dozen, and I'm not aware of any today that are actually full-time earning their living as a practitioner. But there have been some. Louise Hay, for example, you may be aware of the author. She started out as a full-time practitioner in New York. She studied under Dr. Raymond Charles Barker. So we want to attain a place of peace, poise, and wisdom, but we also recognize that when we haven't attained it, it may be difficult to pray our way into it, to affirm and treat our way into it. So this is why we would have access to a practitioner who can see our possibility, our potential, without having to experience our anxiety. So I make sure I always have a practitioner, to this day. Of course, I have my wife, and she's a practitioner, and I have two prayer partners that I pray with every week, and I have another practitioner that I pay that does treatment for me as requested, because I recognize that when I need it the most, I'm often not able to attain the consciousness, the inner quietude, if you will, of being certain that I'm speaking my word into the law in a way that the law will be receptive to. Okay, I hope that makes sense. All right, so this is really an important idea. So let's go back. And he talks about treatment and what it is. He says, effective mental treatment is propelled by a consciousness of love and a realization that the creative spirit is always at work. The practitioner does not feel that he or she must compel the force to work. It is the nature of the creative power to take form, and it is the nature of people to use it. So here again, he's getting to that idea that when we do treatment, when we do our prayer work, we're in a place of calm. We're in a place of trust. We're in a place of speaking our word into a law, the law of mind, we might call it, that we trust is responding by corresponding to the mental impress, the mental idea, the mental belief system that we create as we do our work. The interesting thing is that a practitioner can see the truth for us, and to the degree we're receptive to that truth, even though we're not able to maybe attain the consciousness of it in the moment, to the degree we're receptive to it, it seems that the work of a practitioner can also be effective, even though we're not doing it ourselves. That's really quite an interesting thing. And nobody understands fully how that can work, but I've had enough experience of it in my own life, both as a practitioner and as a practitioner client, to see that it can and does work. And he says the possibility of demonstrating does not depend on environment, condition, location, personality, or opportunity. It depends upon our belief and our acceptance and our willingness to comply with the law through which all good comes. So here, once again, we're talking about this idea of thinking our way into a sense of trust in whatever term you use, the law, the universe, the oneness, spirit, God, whatever term you want to use. It's a recognition that we can bring ourselves into alignment with our highest good, with I like to call that our soul's agenda, the soul of each of us having in mind, having an urge that we express fully as who we came here to be. So my soul is about me, and your soul is about you, but our souls are also connected to the infinite mind, to the infinite presence. So this idea of an infinite spirit is also incredibly important, because if I see myself as separate from God, as many people do in terms of either whether they've been taught that or in practice, where they're praying to a deity, a being, or some idea that they see as separate from themselves, then all you can really do in terms of your own mental and emotional state is kind of plead or negotiate. When I was a little boy, I was raised a Catholic, and if I wanted something, I would get down on my knees, and I knew how to do the position, and pray, have my hands in a prayer thing, and I would very sincerely ask God for what I wanted, a bicycle, or somebody to leave me alone, or somehow for my homework to manifest before school started the next day, or something like that. And as I did that, I was asking God to do something different than God had been already doing, and I wasn't going to do anything other than ask for it, you see. So that idea of prayer, that kind of supplication, is different than what we call spiritual mind treatment, in which I'm not asking God to do anything. I'm trying to treat my own mind to be more in alignment what has already been given. Because spirit as an infinite, I can never be separate from it. And if I can't add to or subtract from an infinite. So if there's only one thing happening and I'm an element or an aspect of it, I want to learn how that one thing operates, and that's what we call the law, or the law of mind. And it operates by bringing things out of potentiality into actualization. So you and I are like actualizing beings. We take potential and we actualize it into experience, and sometimes into form, into our lives. And we're doing this all the time. Spiritual mind treatment is just about trying to do it in the way we intend to, rather than in ways we don't intend to. See? So it's very simple in the sense of a process, but we have to come to terms with, how do I work with the law? How do I come to terms with my understanding and my contemplation of what is this power, this force I'm dealing with? And how does it operate as me? And how can I bring myself into alignment both with it in the universal sense, and also with my highest self as that soul's agenda of wanting to express fully as me, whatever that means. And my soul, I realize, Carl Jung said this, my soul is never satisfied. It always wants more expression, more possibility, more fulfillment. And when we fight against that, we become diminished in our lives. We get old and bitter, because we feel like we've been cheated, when in reality, what we haven't been doing is really working on being aligned with our soul's agenda of who and what we are. And I like Dr. Gary Simmons from Unity says, who have I come here to be? That's what my soul knows. And often I'm directed away from that, I'm told to go into the family business, even though that's not what my soul wants. I'm told to, do this or do that because of social pressure that my soul would rather have something else going on. So let's look at a couple of things that we're talking about in terms of the purpose of the teaching. I think one is to help us build a consciousness of the divine as infinite. And again, we can't, our human minds are essentially finite. We can't fully comprehend an infinite, but we can understand certain aspects of it. And one is that you can't have an infinite and something. So if spirit is infinite, I must be part of it. You must be part of it. And I like to say there's only one thing happening here, and that's spirit unfolding, expressing, and evolving. And I am somehow part of that process. To build a consciousness of myself as having a divine nature, in addition to the fact that I have a physical nature, my physical nature is obvious to me. When I stub my toe, I'm really recognizing my physical nature. The key is to also recognize my divine nature, especially after I've stubbed my toe, or after something has been frustrating, or something, or so forth, and to see the divine nature in others. You see, which can often be a challenge because it's often well disguised. And to use that consciousness of the divine as infinite and of myself as having a divine nature to govern my thoughts, my emotions, and my actions, so that I come into alignment, into harmony with this highest version of myself. And it really does speak to, have I really given a lot of thought to who and what I am? Why am I here? What is my soul's agenda? And the way to tell what my soul's agenda is to see what urges drive me to things. And especially when I was a little child, what were you fascinated by when you were a little child, where you would completely get lost in time, and where you would just be able to, you just couldn't wait. It was like a kid looking forward to Christmas, let's say, with that kind of an attitude. What kind of things in your life, and maybe you were steered away from those. We often see people in later life, in what Jung calls the second adulthood, is they return to things like getting into art and getting into different expressions that maybe they left behind as a child, because they had to go out and earn a living, or they had to go out and comply with various social structures and desires and so forth. And we do have to do that. It's not about making that wrong. It's about recognizing, how can I come back into alignment if I've been out of alignment with that essential self that I came here to be, and come into a feeling or a being expression of that. So all of my treatment, my personal prayer work, is about focusing on my being state. Am I being the kind of person who has a good life? Am I being the kind of person who is compassionate, loving, and caring? Am I being the kind of person who sits and meditates every day? Am I being the kind of person who has prosperity in their lives in terms of, enough money, or enough friends, or enough support, or good health? All those things. Prosperity is simply a means to freedom of choice. Is that who I'm being? Or am I being something less than that, and then trying to reach out of a limited sense of self to grasp these things that I don't feel like I can get any other way? So the essence, the purpose of this teaching, I think, is to awaken us to that soul's agenda, and to help us to come into alignment from the deepest part of our subconscious up to our conscious everyday activities of thoughts, feelings, and actions, so that we're an authentic version of ourselves all the time, you see. And there can be costs to that. There may be some people that are upset with you if you do that. There may be some people that are counting on you to be different. There may be some aspects of yourself that you think, I'm supposed to be doing this over here, but my heart wants to be doing this over here. So part of the process is coming to terms with all those different possibilities, so that we can, be one. We can be one with ourselves. We can move into the latter part of life with a sense of grace and a sense of ease. when I was a new Science of Mind student, a long time ago, there was I was in a big church in Fort Lauderdale. We had about 150 people in our Science of Mind 1 class. And there was a very old gentleman that was taking it, probably for the 15th time. And he and I were talking at a break one time, and he said to me, "You know what this teaching's about, don't you?" And I was smart enough to say, "No, tell me." And he said, "The science of mind is about learning how to die." I said, "Tell me about that." He says, "Because when you learn how to live, you'll know how to die. And you'll know when it's your time to die, and you'll probably have a much better death than if you go out grasping and struggling and feeling cheated." He said, "If you follow this teaching, you'll learn how to live fully." And that's really what it's about. That's the purpose of the teaching, to my mind, anyway. Everything else, as they say, is just commentary. Okay. So let's close with a prayer, shall we? So I invite you to join me in consciousness and to know the truth together. And the truth is that we are all perfect in unfolding and expressing, and we all have access to everything we need to live the life of our dreams. I know that Spirit is right here, right now, in, around, through, and as each of us and all of us, that its presence is preordained, that there is nothing that we can bring into our lives that does not already exist within us as potential. So I know that we are in perfect attunement with that one idea, that nothing is obstructing us except our own limited beliefs, and we hereby dissolve those beliefs that hold us back. So I know for each of us and all of us that life is unfolding beautifully, joyfully, perfectly, and in perfect divine order, that we are in good health, that we have everything we need to live freely, openly, fully, and compassionately. I know that I am not moved by appearances, therefore appearances move. And I know that I have a complete sense of gratitude for this truth. I'm grateful for this teaching in my life. I'm grateful for the use I have made and am making of it. I'm grateful for all the wonderful friendships that have come through this teaching to me, and all the opportunities to share and be aware and to be part of such wonderful communities as you have in Ukiah. And I know all of this is so. With love and joy, I release this word into that creative field that we call mind, knowing it is done unto us as we believe. And I invite you to say with me, and so it is. And thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jim. Dr. Lockard. That was absolutely wonderful. All of it, the message, the treatment. Do you think it might be possible for you to stay after we close for some questions? There was some really, really great basic science of mind in there, and I imagine some people would love to hear more about it.
Excuse me. Yeah, I can stay for just a few minutes. It is French dinner time coming up, so.
I'm sorry.
Oh, no problem. That's all right. I mean, it's
it
just
would be
one
wonderful if you could. There was just some really, really basic, great stuff in there that we'd
Sure,
love
I'll stick
to.
around for a bit. Yeah.
Perfect. So I am going to do some announcements. Actually, really the only announcement we have for today is that we're still contributing to building bridges. And that there also is a board meeting today after service. So those of you on the board, please stay on Zoom, or I know Dr. Candace is in church. And Elizabeth, if you could play us out, that would be wonderful. Thank you, Elizabeth. That was absolutely beautiful. That was a wonderful musical treatment. It was just perfect. Is there anything that you would like to tell us about what's happening in your life, in your musical life right now?
I think it's just a miracle that we have the Zoom and that we have this ability to make music together. And yeah, life is good. And
Thank
taking
you.
that.
Well, it was wonderful having you back in our church. We need you to come do this more often. Thank you, Dr. Lockard, for your wonderful message. And thank you for all of you who participated today. So we will turn it back over to Dr. Lockard. Candace had mentioned that there were some questions that people had had.
Okay.
We're going to end the recording.
Okay.